Started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to what is hopefully the first of many regular webinars by BioPharm Systems related to Siebel CTMS. Today's webinar, we're going to discuss the benefits of integrating Siebel Clinical with your other systems. Before we get started, I do want to mention some logistics about the platform that we're using with ReadyTalk. Right now, all of the participants are on mute by default. So if you do have a question, there's a raise your hand button on your screen that you should see. So you can click on that if you have a question or if you are having problems with the audio or the video. And to place yourself on, right, like I mentioned, you're on mute right now. So to unmute your phone, you can press *7 to unmute, and then *6 to go back on mute if you need to ask a question for any reason. Okay. All right, so we'll get started. So let's start with some introductions. My name is Param Singh, and I'm the Vice President of the Clinical Trial Management Solution Practice at BioPharm Systems. I've been working in the industry for a little over 11 years now, and nearly for the entire time I've been working with Siebel Clinical. I've been on over 15 implementations of Siebel Clinical, several of which have had integrations with many of the systems that we're going to discuss today. And with me we have Tricia O'Donnell from Cavidan, who will be co-presenting with me during today's webinar. Tricia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Param. Good day, everyone. This is Tricia O'Donnell, and I'm the Director of Clinical Systems here at Cavidan, and I am the business owner for, among others, the CTMS system, and have been involved in this project that's going to be discussed today in the case study. So thank you for joining us.
Great. So let's have a look at today's agenda. We're going to start with some basics around CTMS integration. We'll discuss some common systems that CTM systems normally integrate with, what specific data they share among those integrations, and ideal situations for implementing each type of integration. Next, we'll go over some different strategies with regard to integration. There are several different approaches that can be employed with each integration, and typically business and technical needs will determine which strategy is appropriate. Once we cover those basics, we're going to go specific. We're going to go into the specific case study that we're going to present today. And our friends at Cavidan were gracious enough to help us present the specifics around the business needs for this integration project, which was to integrate Oracle Clinical and Remote Data Capture System with Siebel CTMS. And then we're going to look at a live demonstration of the interface. We're going to look at each system, how the data is set up, the administration of the interface itself, and even run the integration live. And then at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers. First, we're going to look at some common integrations with CTMS. The most frequently requested integration for a clinical trial management system is the integration with a clinical data management or electronic data capture system. We're going to discuss one such interface in detail today in our case study, which is the integration of Oracle Clinical and RDC with Siebel CTMS. This integration allows subject visit activities to be automatically created in CTMS based on this information being entered in the CDM or EDC system. This interface reduces duplicate data entry of this data, eliminates human error, and since this data drives investigator payments in CTMS, the interface ensures timely and accurate processing of those payments as well. While this integration is very beneficial and typically one of the first ones that organizations move forward with, it's important that both systems and their processes are stable and clearly defined before moving forward with the integration. There's a higher risk when integrating newly implemented systems and processes, as any changes or tweaks to the system or process will affect the interface and could result in rework. Another similar type of integration for subject and subject visit and activity data is with an interactive voice response system, or IVRS, at the site. While the same type of data is shared and integrated, the approach to this type of interface, since you're dealing with an outside vendor, should not be point-to-point. And what I mean by that, a point-to-point interface is one where you specifically tie the two systems together with the integration. So for IVRS and other vendor integrations as a best practice, we should implement standard XML-based integration where the IVRS vendor will generate files in a specific XML format, send it to the sponsor, and then you import it into your CTMS. The benefit to that type of integration is that it does not limit you with the vendor that you're currently using. So if you were to switch or add vendors for this type of service, the new vendor only needs to adhere to the same format, and your existing interface will process these files as well. An integration to a financial system is also very high on organizations' lists of interfaces for CTMS. Since CTMS generates the payment request based on completed activities, automating the process of this request once it's approved would streamline the process and ensure timely payments to our investigators. Also, once these payments are processed, the details of the transaction can automatically be entered in CTMS from your financial system. So clinical operations can have those details to respond to investigator inquiries about that payment. Ideally, this integration works well if your organization has one system or at least one overall process defined for processing payments. If there's multiple financial systems in a global environment with different rules for payment processing, that's going to increase the complexity of routing and processing those automatic payments. Integrating with a safety system can be done for a few reasons. From a clinical trials perspective, adverse events and serious adverse events that are captured during monitoring are logged in the CTMS. But to fully reconcile with the information captured in a company's safety system, we would need to integrate that data. So for purely reconciliation purposes, organizations have put these types of integrations in place with a safety system. Another innovative way that Siebel has been integrated to a safety system is by having Siebel be the initial call and case intake mechanism, which would then automatically create the case in the safety system for further investigation. For either of these integrations, again, it's lower risk to do these once both the CTMS and safety systems and processes have been clearly defined. While CTMS has a document tracking module, it's not meant to be a fully robust document storage and management system. So most organizations implement separate EDM systems such as Documentum or SharePoint. And so the integrations of these systems is typically done by linking the document tracking record in CTMS with the actual stored electronic document in the EDM system. And it's important to note that any web-based EDM system can be easily integrated with Siebel CTMS through the URL links of the stored documents tied directly to the document tracking records in CTMS. And to further automate this integration, if both systems were to adhere to the same clinical hierarchy, so protocol, country or region, then site, if they adhere to the same clinical hierarchy, the CTMS system could automatically determine the storage location of any document tracked in the document management system because it follows the same structure. Clinical data warehouse solutions such as Life Science Data Hub with components like clinical data development analytics and OBIE are used to bring data from multiple different systems together for robust business intelligence, key metrics, and dashboards. This is the solution that ultimately brings all of that relevant clinical system data together for reporting purposes and to extract key performance indicators in order to make key business decisions. The ideal situation where this becomes a key need is when you actually have a substantial amount of data or ample data in the system that can ultimately feed your data warehouse. Also in this scenario, to extract insight and information from that data, the organization needs to define the key performance indicators or questions being asked of that data to make those key decisions for this to be worthwhile. And last but not least, one of the newer high-profile requests for CTMS integrations has been integration from a sponsor organization's CTMS to the CTMS of its preferred contract research organizations, or CROs, for outsourced studies. As we see more and more lean towards outsourced studies, this integration is going to be a key one to bring in all of the data that is collected and tracked by the CRO in-house for tracking and reporting purposes. These are large and complex integrations as they typically deal with all of the data of the study that the CRO tracks. So incremental imports or incremental loads where the vendor exports only the new or modified data to the sponsor rather than all of the data each time is recommended. So this reduces the amount of data that is being transferred back and forth and processed during each execution of this interface. And similar to the IVRS integration that we talked about earlier, since this integration also deals with external vendor systems, it's important not to implement limiting point-to-point interfaces and go with, again, an XML-based approach. Okay. So next, let's look at some strategies or methods for integration. The first approach is data replication, which is copying data between applications and keeping the data synchronized in both. This approach is probably the most common, as in many times it's required to keep data in both systems. For example, the subject and subject visit data is required both in your clinical data management system for your CRFs that are collected, as well as in your CTMS to track completed activities for investigator payments. Data sharing, on the other hand, allows us to access data in other applications without replicating the data in the target system. This is a good approach to integration if you simply need to view data from an external source with your Siebel application and don't need or want to replicate that data. For example, you might want to view study design details such as clinical planned events in your Oracle's clinical system, but do not necessarily need to store or replicate that data in Siebel. So you can access that information in a list in a Siebel view, which simply looks directly into your Oracle clinical system and extracts the data from the clinical planned events. And we're going to actually see an example of that in our demo today. So in addition to sharing data and embedding it into your Siebel application, you can also embed an entire external application within your Siebel application wrapper, so the user doesn't need to jump from application to application. So for the user, they're in one system, even though we've actually embedded a whole other system directly into your Siebel application. So whether you're sharing data or replicating data, with integration you must decide how timely this integration needs to be. And for that we either have real-time integration or batch integration. And real-time is for time-sensitive integration where once the change is made in a source system, that change needs to be reflected in the target system immediately. An example of this could be your integration from CTMS to your financial system, where once your payment request in CTMS has been marked as approved, the system immediately sends that information over to your finance system for processing via a real-time web service. Batch processing, on the other hand, will actually queue up your integration records in the source system and at a predefined interval will process and send all of the queued up records to the target system via the interface. So an example of this could be the return trip on the financial interface. So payment details of the check number, the check date, the check amount, the payment details stored in your financial system about the processed payments could be returned on a nightly batch. Typically that's not time crucial, so the information regarding that actual payments will be done on a nightly batch from your finance system and updated in your CTMS accordingly. So now that we've covered some basics around general integration with CTMS, I want to turn it over to Tricia, who will give you some background on the business case from Cavidan before we implemented the interface.
Okay, thanks, Param. A little bit of our business, or a little bit of the history with regards to Cavidan. Cavidan is a large global company. It's acquisition-based. In other words, we expected that we would acquire other companies during the conduct of this integration. We have pharmaceuticals as well as medical devices, and our products range from gauzes all the way to very complex medical devices. We do investigator-initiated trials through phase 3 types of trials. Traditionally, Cavidan it has a decentralized structure with global business units located outside of our main headquarters. There was currently no standardized CTMS system throughout the company. Basically, at each GBU level, it was Excel spreadsheets, so there was no really understanding of what CTM systems could do. And when we decided to do the integration project, it was on the heels of having done an implementation between 2 global systems, that being the Oracle Clinical Data Capture System and then the Siebel system. So our business case was that we really kind of wanted to give the users the benefits of a CTMS system, which is to provide input from decreasing human error, duplicate data entry, to streamline and to provide better management for the CTMS systems. Next slide, Param, please. Okay. So basically, as I said, we had no existing CTMS system at any division. There are lots of benefits that are addressed here that happen with regards to CTMS systems. They definitely provide real-time data, better management, decrease the workload, save time and money, decrease the allocation of resources, as well as improving relationships, that the information that you do provide is more timely and up-to-date, and definitely improves the planning and the management of your clinical trials. For Cavidan, the major impetus for doing this was to standardize business processes. So we did a simultaneous implementation across all our GBUs at once, because our GBUs were definitely used to kind of individually handling how they managed their clinical trials. So our main driving was the standardization of business process. And we were probably very naive in that we did not have an understanding of these kind of systems, so it did take a lot of time to kind of onboard users and move forward with the implementation. I'll turn it back, and if there's not any questions, I'll turn it over to Param, I think.
Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you.
So before we jump into the live demo of the integration, I recognize that some of you may be more familiar with Siebel Clinical than Oracle Clinical RDC, or vice versa. So to help with that, we have this slide that shows the related objects in both systems. So as you can see, a site in Oracle Clinical is the equivalent of the account in Siebel. An investigator in OC is the equivalent of a contact in Siebel, and so on. The important ones to note for this interface is where we do the mapping per study, which we're going to go over. But clinical planned events in Oracle Clinical RDC are directly related to the subject visit in your subject visit template. And a DCM or a data collection module is essentially a CRF page in OC and RDC. A DCI is data collection instrument, is basically a section of that CRF page, and questions are, of course, a question on the CRF page. So DCI and questions map directly to your subject visit activities in the subject visit template. And this is all during study design, and once the actual events and actual CRFs start getting entered in OC and RDC, those will be the ones that will automatically create the actual subject visits and visit activities in Siebel Clinical. Okay. So when we were analyzing the requirements for this interface with Cavidan, originally we looked at a potential two-way interface where Siebel Clinical would first set up the study, contact accounts, and sites within Siebel Clinical, and then it would automatically do an interface to Oracle Clinical to set up the same objects in Oracle Clinical and REC. But it was quickly determined that the benefit of automating that process doesn't outweigh the risk and effort in developing that specific interface. So we went forward with a one-way interface from Oracle Clinical RDC to Siebel Clinical, and the key pieces of data that we focused on were subject visits and subject visit activities. And in addition to these pieces of information, we also incorporated in a slightly different manner by using OC derivation procedures to create protocol deviations and serious adverse events and CRF records in Siebel Clinical as well. So while we used the bulk of the interface to do these specific data points, we also had some other streams that would create protocol deviations and serious adverse events as well. So the overall process flow for the interface, we would set up the study in Oracle Clinical. So this is a manual setup. So your study design and study administration on both systems doesn't really change all that much. So first you would set up the study in Oracle Clinical, set up your clinical plan events and your DCIs and DCMs and questions. And then the second step is setting up the study in Siebel Clinical. So in Siebel Clinical, setting up the protocol, the subject visit template, visits and activities as you normally would in Siebel Clinical, that gets set up manually. Then we have to have some sort of trigger or some sort of indicator that selects the study to be integrated. So for Cavidan specifically, they didn't want to integrate all of their studies, so they wanted the flexibility to pick and choose which ones were to be integrated in this way. So we created an integration status on the study, which indicates which one will be integrated. Once that's selected, then we complete the mapping between the Siebel Clinical subject visit template and the OC objects, the Oracle Clinical objects. Once those mappings are complete, we go back into the study setup and activate that study in Siebel Clinical. So now we set the integration status to active and start bringing in this integration data. Once that's active, the interface runs on a predefined time frequency, which will then auto-create subject visits, subject visit activities, CRF records, serious adverse events, and protocol deviation records automatically in Siebel Clinical as they're captured in Oracle Clinical on the CRF. Okay? And then the last piece here is reviewing and adjusting integration data as needed. We have a new integration administration view, which we'll cover. But basically, every time the interface runs, it logs the execution of that interface in this integration administration view. And if there were any errors that were encountered and some additional information that Cavidan specifically wanted to see, we would log that in that administration view. So the integration administrator didn't need to go into the database to look at those errors. They're actually available on screen directly in the application in Siebel. So that's the overall process. For the mapping between SE and OC, like I mentioned, the subject visit template visits are a one-to-one mapping to the Oracle clinical planned event. So from a visit's perspective for study design, we have a one-to-one mapping between the two systems, so that made it pretty straightforward in terms of mapping. Subject visit activities, however, were a little bit different. So for subject visit activities, each activity in Siebel Clinical could have one or more DCIs or questions that needed to be either answered or filled in or completed for the interface to automatically mark that activity as completed and ready for payment. So we developed a one-to-many mapping within the subject visit template in Siebel Clinical for us to be able to do that. All right. So now let's jump directly into the demo. So I'm going to ask Jyoti to share his desktop so we can walk through that. Okay. So first, we're going to go into the clinical administration view, clinical administration screen where the protocol is set up. And again, since not all of the studies are to be integrated, this is where the admin user will go to select each study for integration. There are a few statuses that we added here, but to do the next step, the mapping of, which is the mapping of the subject as a template, you must select the integration status of either selected or on hold. So selected is the first time you do that mapping, and then then you make it active, and then you start integrating. But if you need to make any changes, then you would update the integration status to on hold, and that allows you to do that mapping again. So we're going to set the status to on hold, and so then we can move to the next step, which is looking at your mapping for your subject as a template. So we can move to the subject visit template section and start to map the SVT to the study design in Oracle Clinical. So for visits, we've created an additional field with a pick applet, which is integrated real-time to the corresponding study in Oracle Clinical. So as soon as we pull up that pick applet, we're looking directly into OC through this pick applet and pulling in the actual values in real time. And to show this, I'm going to ask Jyoti to go to Oracle Clinical. So we're going to look at the same study, and we'll open up the clinical planned event. There's our clinical planned event, and there is our subject visit template on the other side. So this is a live pull from this data directly from this system. So through this pick applet, the admin user will map the visit to that clinical planned event. So for activities in the subject visit template, it's a bit different since it's a one-to-many mapping for those records. But the same real-time approach to the OC data has been built to do this mapping as well. So in the view underneath the activities view, you will notice that we have the activity of screening that's highlighted, and underneath we have the DCI dash question mapping view. And here we're able to add one or more criteria, basically, that constitutes that screening activity as being complete. So in this particular example, we see that these DCIs and then finally that question need to be populated and completed for that screening visit to be complete. So in this example, if you look in that question, that it's the informed consent date that needs to be populated for the screening activity to be marked as complete automatically by the interface. Okay? So you would do this for each of the activities that you have under each of your visits and map them to specific DCIs on your CRF or your questions, and that way basically you're building the criteria that says for this activity all of these criteria have to be met for that activity to be marked complete by the interface. And again, that's going to drive your payment. So, if the screening visit is to be paid at $300 with the interface, the system won't mark that complete until we have that informed consent date and all those DTIs, collected and entered in Oracle Clinical. So now that the administration portion of the study setup is complete, we're ready now to run the interface. So to do this, we have to change the integration status to active for that particular study. So now that we've marked it as active, we can now go to the subject screen, and we're going to pull up our study and one of our sites, and we'll see that there's two subjects, subjects 201 and 202, that are in the system for that study and site. If we view the same study in Oracle Clinical and go to the patients table, we can actually see that there's going to be a couple of additional subjects and visits that are in Oracle Clinical. So we'll see patient 203, and there he is with all of their visits, and then patient 204 is also in the Oracle Clinical system. So now we're going to go back into Siebel Clinical. Typically, this interface will run automatically at a predefined interval, but for demo purposes, we're going to launch the interface manually. So Jyoti's going to launch it from the back end and run the interface. The interface typically takes about 2 minutes to run. So while that's running, we're going to go and move into the new interface administration views that we created to monitor the processing of the interface. So the integration log view, on these views we can see when a particular run of the interface was started and kicked off, and how long it took to execute, when it ended, and whether there were any errors that were encountered during the run. So if there were any errors, the admin screen will log the errors in the error log table, which will give detailed information about the error and allows the admins to correct any data and rerun that interface. So that's the great thing about this interface, is that even if you encounter errors, it allows you to take corrective action, and by the next run of the interface, so if it's not something crucial, you could just let it wait until, if you're doing this on a nightly basis, for example, you could just wait till the next run of the interface, and all the data will correct itself. So this admin view also gives, like you see here, a full history of every time the interface has executed in this system. Okay. Jyoti, has our particular run, has that executed? Can we look at that? So like I said, it takes roughly about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes to do that. And there you see it. So now that the interface has executed, we're back at the subjects view, and you can see that there's 2 additional subjects, and their visits and activities have been imported into Siebel Clinical automatically. And the interface automatically created the subjects, corresponding visits and activities and marked relevant records as complete based on our mapping. Okay. So that's the full sort of live demo of the interface and how it works and how it's administered. So now I'm going to jump back into our presentation, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it to Tricia to discuss the benefits of the interface and just give some additional information about how the business has perceived the interface.
Sure. Thank you, Param. Well, there's lots of benefits that we actually addressed with regards to integrations. We chose a mechanism that was basically hybrid. We didn't choose an all or nothing. Our system is flexible, allows us to pick and choose which studies. More importantly, it's also scalable. So Cavidan, again, has this decentralized structure with multiple business units, different products and different trials. We went directly from an implementation of a data system and a CTMS system to an integration. And as I spoke earlier, the reasoning before that was basically to standardize business process. But also, in addition to some of the other benefits that are listed here, which is, the safety reasons and the decreased manual entry, as well as to enhance the data, the consistency, as well as to assist with clinical trial management. One of the big benefits that I see is the kind of the understanding among our business units of business processes, not only from how to standardize them, but ownership of the system. We were used to or had a model that basically IS, who were knew how to manage and implement projects. Business did not necessarily take ownership of a project, and in this case they definitely did. This was designed with them in mind. They were very involved, and as such, the benefits of that were to kind of take what was designed for them and move them forward as they do manage clinical trials. So if I could say anything, it's that you need to really plan your implementations out live. You need to involve your users earlier, frankly from day one, because at least in our experience, IS knows what resources are involved. Cavidan was very naive in that way, that we hadn't done these kind of systems before, so we really hadn't truthfully fully understood the resources that were required, in addition to the day job that people have. That said, I think it's been a great project. It's given us what we need, not only for today, but also for the foreseeable future. So it's flexible and scalable, and when you design your CTMS systems, you need to just keep what your business users desire in mind. I don't know if there's any other questions, or Param, please feel free if you want to add anything additional.
Great, thank you, Tricia. Yeah, one thing I do want to mention just from a general integration standpoint. So obviously here, this integration, we're integrating Oracle Clinical or Clinical Data Management System with CTMS. We talked about finance systems, and integrating, payment requests and automatic processing of that as well. If you just look at those two integrations themselves, they really streamline your process quite a bit and reduce the amount of work and study management that you really have to do. So, there's very minimal sort of manual study management at that point if you have all these systems integrated. And so, really trying to target the best and most beneficial integrations with your CTMS, and sort of prioritizing and seeing what the overall ROI is going to be, return on investment for those. But certainly those two, once we put those two in, everything from a site perspective, and below, subject visit activities automatically being, entered and completed in the application, marked ready for payment, and then you generate a payment and approve it, and then all the financial processing happens automatically with the finance interface, so you can see how, excuse me, that could be very beneficial. So we have a few minutes for some questions, and if there's any, well, first off, if you do have any questions, please make sure you unmute your line by pressing *7. And so with that, I'll turn it over to anyone that may have any questions for either myself or Tricia with regards to this interface or integration in general.
I have a question. How long did it take to perform the integration for Cavidan?
So the whole project itself, from integration, so we had analysis workshops, design, development, and go live. So the whole implementation, Tricia, maybe you can help me out with this, but was it approximately 5-6 months?
A little bit more than that. I think we started off in the design phase in February, and we wrapped up in October.
Yes.
Okay,
And there were a couple of reasons for that also, just because of the number of our different users, the complexity of getting their requirements and getting them onboarded. So there was a little bit of extra time, as well as our documentation processes as well took some significant time as well. So that needs to be factored in as well.
And also, we did also do some enhancements to the system at the same time as deploying the interface. So, but roughly, I would imagine that, considering the scope of the interface and considering the complexity of just the organization itself with the multiple different business units, I would venture to say that for an organization that has less business units and a single process already defined kind of thing, there's we could probably, I would say a 6-month time frame is relatively appropriate for this type of interface. And the other thing that I'll note is leveraging what other companies have done in the past also leads to a very accelerated sort of development cycle as well. So taking sort of lessons learned with from our friends from Cavidan, there's definitely the ability to leverage some existing approaches to this and streamlining an implementation of interface.
I would agree with that, and would be welcome to providing any of our insight to anybody who is going through any similar implementation or integration projects as well. Again, we were very naive, so we did spend a lot of time in basically making sure our users fully understood what this meant and what we needed from them, and getting their requirements and clarifying their requirements, and that worked really, really well.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, what I'm imagining is, let's say we have 3 disparate database systems, and we want to get them talking or sharing data with each other. I think what the services are is for you guys to come in, look at our 3 database systems, and then customize the graphical user interface that you demoed to understand how to talk to those 3 systems, so that an internal user then could build a query that maps the data to those 3 systems to produce a result set combining all 3. Have I encapsulated that correctly?
So let me say that back to you. So you have 3 different systems that you currently use, 3 different databases, and you're saying that we would want to bring that together in some graphical user interfaces, so in Siebel potentially, and give the users the ability to sort of form queries from that. Is that right?
Well, I saw you use a tool to get Oracle Clinical and Siebel talking to each other, producing a result set from both systems.
Yeah, I think they're mainly pulling data out of the Oracle and importing it into Siebel.
Oh, importing from one to the other. Okay. Yeah. How much setup work is just hypothetically, how much setup work is needed under the covers to get the GUI working for end users?
So if you just wanted to sort of integrate the two, like I said, there's data replication or data sharing. So there's also ways to do virtual, what's called virtual business components or external business components within Siebel, and that is actually a capability that Siebel has to bring in data without actually importing in data. You can actually have a view, and you can run queries, and you can have the same graphical user interface as Siebel does, but you're actually looking at Oracle Clinical data and performing the same types of queries that you can do within Siebel. So Siebel, you can build business components that are based on external databases. So that's one approach that you can take. So I think the first thing we would need to do is analyze sort of what the requirements are, like why how we want to use this data, whether it needs to be married up with Siebel Clinical data, or whether it's just for sort of viewing purposes and reporting purposes and things like that. So, but there's several different ways that we can approach that. The virtual business component option, I think, is pretty straightforward, and it doesn't require a whole lot of setup. It's all in Siebel tools and creating those objects and external database connections. But that's certainly an option to do what you're saying, and sort of giving the users the ability to query and filter and sort and do a bunch of things that they're used to doing in Siebel Clinical with external application data. And to set up the interface to do that, or set up the user interface to do that, it's all through configuration through Siebel tools. So there's there's things that you can leverage. You can take objects that are already created, copy them, and base them off of the external data that you're bringing in. So it's pretty straightforward.
I have a follow-up question again from Gilead. Have you had experience or have done integration projects for metadata, like to bring basically the patient visit information from metadata into Siebel Clinical?
So we're actually going to be doing a project exactly like that with metadata rave instead of Oracle Clinical and RDC. But we're going to take the same type of approach, or we're going to go in with the same type of approach that we utilized here. There obviously are going to be some differences, but we're actually embarking down a project right now that's going to look at a metadata to Siebel interface similar to the one that we just described with Oracle Clinical. But I would say that we're walking in with the same type of approach, although obviously there's some differences between Oracle Clinical and metadata rave.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're just about done with time, and I want to thank first I want to thank Tricia O'Donnell for helping us present today, and also thank all of you for your participation. Like I mentioned earlier, I hope this is the first of many regular webinar sessions that we'll have related to CTMS from BioPharm. And if you have any ideas of topics you would like to see covered in these webinars, please send me an email, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next BioPharm webinar.